You are listening to Anna Letitia Cook at Women Up Radio.
Good morning and welcome to Women Up Radio. It's a real pleasure to have Chiara Condi back on the show. Chiara is an activist, a speaker, and an expert raising awareness about gender equality and diversity. She consults corporations on diversity goals. Also, she's recently launched a podcast, The Other Half, which interviews male leaders and CEOs around the world on the subject of gender equality in both personal and professional lives, which I think is wonderful. Chiara is also a regular voice in the media, and she's an internationally renowned speaker. In 2017, she was awarded the Women of Influence Prize, so very well done for that.
Thank you.
She's the founder of Led by Her, a non-profit that works on women's entrepreneurship, innovation, and women's rights. And that's what we talked about last time that Chiara was on the show. Prior to Led by Her, Chiara worked for the European Bank, so a very different movement, and it's very interesting to see the development. Anyway, welcome to the show, Chiara. Thank you so much for coming. It's lovely to see you today.
Thank you. I'm so excited for today's episode, and I'm so excited to be back after all these years.
Brilliant. That's great. So tell me, what have you been doing recently? So what's the most recent things that have happened over the last 3 years or so since we last spoke?
Well, I think something that came from my nonprofit work was that I was helping women who had suffered from violence become entrepreneurs and rebuild their lives. And doing all that work on the ground, having that impact, and being in sort of a direct line of help made me think about the fact that we should actually not have, violence or inequality in the first place. And so I think I became more and more interested in how do we actually stop these phenomena, and how can we raise awareness amongst everybody, all of society in different spheres, in different parts of the world, so that inequality is no longer a problem, violence against women is no longer a problem, and all these issues are solved once and for all. I think it's where I was in a healing approach maybe 3 years ago. Now I'm more in a preventative approach.
Very good. And have you found it difficult to transition to that? Or has it been a sort of a natural flow?
I think it's been a natural flow. I always think that the best flows happen naturally. Because working on the issue where you obviously become passionate about it, and working on the issue directly also gives you a lot of ideas and insight about how things could be better, what could be done. And then you develop a voice about that. And you say, well, this is how I think we should change this. This is how I think we should think about things. And then you become slowly but surely, action by action, you become that voice, and you start embodying those beliefs. And carrying a new role. And I think that's how it really happened for me.
I think that's great. And I know, obviously, when people have come from difficult circumstances to become entrepreneurs, to remove violence in general, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of problems, far more so than a normal working environment. However, I think there's a link. And I mean, as you know, I'm very into well-being and holistic success and things like that. So where we need to really try and make every aspect of our life better. Do you find people are becoming more aware of that? And with the women's movements, particularly when there's been difficult circumstances previously, can they have the luxury of thinking of that type of thing? Or is it still very much trying to get the business set up, trying to get the freedom of choice? How far do you think people are along route as well?
Well, I think that today we think about well-being and self-awareness as a pillar to start with, not something you develop later along.
Yeah.
Because obviously, these are keys, and we put these as keys everywhere. I at the heart of Led by Her is coaching and self-development.
Yeah.
Ever since we started, and I'm talking about 8 years ago, 1/3 of our entrepreneurship program was dedicated to self-development, which was unusual at the time.
Yes. Yes.
And people thought, oh, why are you doing all this coaching and what's the need? Well, if people are not also mentally prepared, they're going to give up. They're not going to be able to balance things.
Yeah.
They're going to have a hard time. And then when difficult things happen in their path, which is sort of inevitable for any entrepreneur, they're more likely to give up.
Yeah.
So I think these are things you learn in the beginning, and these are things you start with. These are not things that you learn about later on, or that you come to when it's too late. So I think these are, for me, they're really building blocks that you use.
Yeah.
And I also see that when I'm planning conferences, for example, and around women's issues, I always try to include, in every part of the world, issues around well-being as well.
Yep.
Because I think it's really important, and I think we don't think about it enough. And in the reality of every day, it is one of the hardest things that
Yes.
we have to overcome, managing ourselves as well as managing our project.
Yes, it's definitely a challenge, right? So what aspects of well-being do you think women, particularly career women and women entrepreneurs, are more likely to incorporate in their lives? And how can they find room to fit more in? Because when you're first setting up a business, you are incredibly busy, and you have always the doubt, is it working? Am I making the right choice? Am I in the good direction? Am I going to employ X number of people, et cetera, et cetera? It's a huge pressure. So the tendency, and in corporate as well, trying to progress, trying to get promotion, things like that, particularly when you start younger. I think when you're older, maybe you've got more experience, you can see where to say no, where to put the boundaries. But when you're first starting a business, and even in the growth period of the business, how can you fit things like that in? You've got to focus on, profit and et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't have your own well-being, just as you've been saying, if you don't have the right mindset, the ability to help yourself with things like that, it just makes everything 10 times worse. So what would you say?
Well, I think nothing happens. You plan it that way, So I think you start from the beginning, and you don't think about it once you're already at the point of overwhelm, because when you're already at the point of overwhelm or burnout, it's going to be, a very, very much more difficult to get yourself out of that. And it's going to take, a lot more than if you, think about it a little every day.
Yeah.
And I think for everybody that path is different. I try to do something that's enjoyable every day, whatever that is, so that I have something to look forward to every day, and that takes me off of my work.
Yes.
Because otherwise I feel that sometimes I never stop working.
Yeah.
And then the evening comes and I just go to sleep, and
I can relate to that.
and I have done nothing else. So now, I really plan it.
Yeah.
And, whether that's during a lunch break or whether that's in the evening, and you see that you're actually much better
Yeah.
if you pace yourself out. And that's, I think, the biggest lesson that I've learned is life is not a sprint. You're not running to get somewhere.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a marathon. So
Yeah.
it's like you have to survive a lot of years.
Yeah.
And um there is no kind of real final immediate destination, so you need to keep up all those years, um which is pretty challenging. So I think you really need to think about, just like you think about your business strategy, what's your own survival strategy, and what is important to you, um and about time and everything like that might get in the way of you thinking that you can do these things or not. Uh, for me, it's a question of prioritization. So, what do you put your priority on,
Yeah.
and what is a priority, what can be done tomorrow,
Yeah.
and what can be done the next day, and learning to pace that out, I think, is one of the greatest skills that you can learn as
Yes.
an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's funny because all these things that we're talking about are just so important for your own survival and the survival of your business. Therefore, because if you don't survive, the business doesn't either.
For sure.
But it's funny because I'm just thinking, we never learn these things, you never taught these things. Usually you learn these things by um, falling really hard, getting to that place of burnout and having to take yourself out of that place of burnout, and then saying like, how do I make sure this doesn't happen again?
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah, but we're not really taught about creating that system, and that's the thing. It's a conscious choice.
Yeah.
It's not coincidence if we get to burnout, or it's not the universe's fault or life's fault if we get there. It's a system. This is simply what we're talking about, is simply a system that you can build into your own life, just like you do many other things in your life, and just like you have a business plan or an idea for building your business, and you follow through that plan every single day.
Yeah. But I think even taking small breaks during the day, I mean, it's something so simple, even 2 or 3 minutes, just stopping something, walking around, putting your nose outside, anything like that, because it just takes the level of stress down a tiny bit. It gets you moving, so all of your sort of aches and pains start to go away, and it makes you more creative because your
Yeah.
brain's had a Zen moment. It's gone in a different direction. So it actually energizes you for coming back and doing better and doing more. So you're more productive just from tiny breaks. And a lot of people, I remember when I was working in offices, a lot of people, they just sit at their desk and they do not move. Pressure, pressure, pressure. They might do a quick run for a pee if they were desperate, but literally that is the only break they had. Sandwich at the desk, exactly the same in the afternoon, and go home so shattered they couldn't do anything. And it just doesn't work. And particularly with us talking about women and, women entrepreneurs, a lot of women have also got kids. So when they go home at the end of the day, if they're completely shattered and they've got no energy, then they can't enjoy the time with their kids, which is probably why they set up the business in the first place. And I don't mean that to sound sexist, men or women, they're trying to have a good family environment for their kids, whatever the job is they do. And when people are so tired and so pressured, it makes it very difficult.
Well, something you said really importantly in the beginning, is about taking the small breaks, and doing all those things. I think really reminded me of something that I really believe in, which is that one of the most important things is mindset.
Yeah.
I feel like change your mindset and change everything, change your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Once you change your mindset, everything is possible.
Exactly.
And the thing is, I also believe that on a very small scale. So yes, obviously, if you have a positive mindset, if you believe that things will come to you, you're more likely to reach out for things. You're more likely to reach out to people. You're
Yeah.
more likely to take those steps
Yes.
that are going to help you obtain results.
Yeah.
But on a much smaller scale, you can think of it also as an everyday thing. And I believe that when you sometimes are feeling that you are down, that you can't work on something anymore, that you just, it's not the time, and maybe, it's not the time, like think about what can you do to get yourself in a high mindset.
Yeah.
So, whatever that is for you, go do a yoga class, go walk for 5 minutes, go
Yeah.
get some sun, go sit
Yeah.
on a terrace, go run with a friend. I don't know. And then tackle whatever it is that you need to tackle after you're in a good mindset.
Yeah.
Because I see, just how much more difficult it is to tackle the same exact thing when I'm not in that state.
Yes.
So that's the thing. And I think we just don't, we underestimate kind of the importance of that. And we overestimate, and we think that's permanent, or that's just like that has to be like that. No, just what we never ask ourselves, like, what can I do to change that?
Yeah.
What could I do to get myself in a better state?
Yeah.
And do things.
Yeah.
From there.
Yes. Yep.
Instead of keep forcing yourself when you just don't want to do it. And that's also when your worst comes out, and
Yep.
that's when you're most likely to ask things the wrong way, and people
Yep.
are more likely to say no.
I
So
know. I'm the world's worst dragon.
so yeah, it's kind of, it's better to develop that self-awareness and develop those check-in mechanisms with ourselves. But I think so many ways we're so like disconnected with ourselves, with our needs, with with our everyday temperature, that we just live lives where all we do is force ourselves.
Yep. We push away what we need to rejuvenate ourselves and to source the energy and to feel better, because we let all of the pressure and the outside influences just flood in. And it's difficult to put the barrier and to see really what is our choice and what we're thinking about ourselves and what is really, coming in from outside. I think you made a really good point there, but more people need to think about what they're doing for themselves and not just for their business. So I wanted to ask you if there's any other new projects you've been involved in since we last spoke. I know you mentioned to me the new podcast you're doing, The Other Half.
Yes.
Which, do tell me. It sounds great.
Yes. So I spent a lot of time interviewing men who are sort of leaders around the world about gender equality and in their personal and professional lives.
Yep.
And there's a reason that I wanted to do that. And that was that after years and years of giving conferences a bit all around the world, I realized that every time that I went to a conference, in the room, it would just all be women.
Yep.
It's like as soon as you would have the gender panel, or something women, was called women.
Yeah.
It just would not interest men at all, and there would only be women. So it really became a sort of quest of mine to say, well, how are we going to achieve gender equality in my lifetime if, the only people who are in the room, the only people who we're talking to are women who are already convinced about the subject. And why should gender equality, which is equality between the sexes, only concern women? It should be something that should concern all human beings. And, we should not be the only ones talking about it.
Yeah.
So it became, very interesting for me, also because going to millions of conferences, I never heard, a male point of view. So to hear a male point of view on these issues, to hear men express themselves on these issues, and also to create a conversation where, especially in an area and a subject where there's still a huge gray area, where a lot of subjects, there is not necessarily a right or wrong, but we need to express ourselves on these issues.
Yep.
And to create that space for a conversation to happen, and the conversation that was led by men, not by women, which was explicitly my idea, to reverse that.
Yeah.
And I found that it was really interesting because men do have a point of view on the subject. Men do care about the subject. And each person's experience is really different, based on their life, their culture, their role models. And so you see how much of, what we think of gender is sort of an artificial cultural construct. And then what it takes to deconstruct that.
Yeah. And so what do you find they're saying? What do they have any surprises, anything unexpected, or do they actually feel surprised themselves by what women think they think?
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the sort of the fundamental things you see if you listen to the podcast is that they're always surprised by the questions, because, and this goes back to, the whole gender stereotyping thing, because as women, as, even as CEO or whatever, you would kind of expect somebody to ask you, how do you balance motherhood and being a, CEO, or tell me about your kids, or tell me about your female role models, or all these questions. But men don't really get asked that.
Yep.
So they're very surprised, right? Because they're like, nobody in, my first guest said that, oh, nobody has ever asked me about my mother,
Yeah.
and it's almost like, it feels like almost weird and out of place to ask a man a question like that. And so we have to think, like, why?
Yeah.
And then when he was asked that question, he was very, very touching in his response, and he revealed a lot about how his mother and her career really influenced him and his point of view.
Yep.
And same about his kids, same about his wife. He just was not used to talking about those things.
Yeah.
Because it's as if for women, it's as if they overtake our lives, and it's as if for men, those things don't exist.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're a CEO on one side, and then you're a family man on the other. The two don't.
Yeah, they're kept well apart.
Yes. The two don't come together. So, just crossing there was very interesting for me, because, you learn all these things that they've never been asked before.
Yep.
And you learn about all these things that I never read in interviews. So, and that would be really common to read about women.
Yep.
So I think that, that's just a very interesting perspective, and it shows still how gendered our society is.
Yep. And do you find they have different ideas about how to achieve equality or how to really integrate the genders in a more balanced way? Do they see things because of that perspective and they're never really asked? Do they see things differently?
I think so. I think the people who I interview usually are people who are more open-minded and have thought about these subjects. And
yes, otherwise they wouldn't accept the interview.
Exactly. So very, open to self-questioning and, have a high level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, I think they really do have a lot of points of views about things that should change and what we should do to achieve equality and, what would be important to put in place. So it's very, very interesting because they, they do offer a lot of solutions and a lot of practical bits as well.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to hear that it is really a subject for men and women, and not just for women. And I think that's also why we have not advanced as much as we should, because we have been working at it alone.
Yeah.
And, we have not made a sufficient effort to engage the other half of the world.
Yep. I think also we need to start with children, because if children grow up with a different way of thinking, it changes, for generations. It just obviously takes longer to do it. But if children are still brought up, girls are pink, boys are blue, girls play nurses, boys play engineers, etc., it still carries on with that type of gender difference. They don't really come together and swap over. I mean, do you think there's anything that can be done from that point of view that could help?
Yes, I mean, I think we should learn all these things from the youngest age, because it's really hard to unlearn bad things that you've learned.
Yeah.
And that's why undoing culture is virtually impossible. It's a very difficult task. So you should be teaching these things to your kids. And as a parent, it's always a challenge, because obviously there is your own influence. So what do you choose to put in front of your children? How do you choose to raise them? How do you choose to deal with the relationship between brother and sister? And you can, in a way, influence all that. And I think as a parent, if you have a level of self-awareness, you'll see also how conditioned you are to repeat those stereotypes yourself.
I know.
And then but hopefully, if you have a level of self-awareness, you catch yourself and you undo it. And you say, well, why am I buying that doll? And you're like, well, maybe I should pick something else. But the thing is that you can only go so far, because then, the environment, the school, plays a huge role as well.
Yeah.
So that's why there should be a big effort in the education system to create sort of equality between the genders.
Yeah.
And it should be part of the school system as a whole, so that you don't create these inequalities in the first place, because these inequalities come from somewhere. They're not they don't just fall from the sky. The world is not just that way. We learn that it is that way.
Yeah.
But we learn it from other people.
Yes. Yeah.
And and so I think there's a lot of things that we also talk about in my podcast that that these men are doing, whether it is modeling gender roles themselves to show their children that people can be a certain way, whether it is being really equal with all your children, whether it is, what you're teaching them, what you're exposing them to, and, making sure that you take your girls to STEM classes or something,
Yeah.
or coding classes if they're not exposed to that in school. All these things that you can do, and make sure that you change a little of something for the future so that it
Yeah.
just doesn't keep repeating itself.
Yeah.
And I think we can all do that in our own way, right? Because we all have a sphere of influence, let's say, around us. Of course, if you are, a head of state, you can create laws, and you can, you know, make sure that gender equality happens on a large scale, or if you're a politician or whatever. But um, I think, each one of us, however big or small our role or sphere of influence, has people around,
Yeah.
him or her that are influenced,
Yeah. Yeah.
by
Definitely.
us. So, I mean, that can be your intern, that can be your kids,
Yeah.
that can be your colleagues, your bosses, the people you interact with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So I think if you um, change your behavior to model what you believe in, other people will follow you.
Yes. Yeah. It's a
So
positive
yeah,
mindset. It's catching.
yeah. And notice I said change your behavior, not say that you believe in gender
Yes.
equality, but actually behave like you do.
Yeah.
Because actually saying things and saying that you believe in things does not really influence or inspire people. Only actions inspire people.
Yeah. Very
So
true.
model the behavior yourself,
Yeah.
and other people will follow, and other people will learn. And I think that's how we can make the biggest difference, and get to every person, to every household on this planet.
Yeah. And you said that you spoke to people around the world. Was that in conjunction with the other half? So were you
Yes.
interviewing, so lots of different nationalities?
Yes. Lots of different nationalities, lots of different sectors.
Did you see a difference between the nationalities? Because I know that I've lived in 7 countries, and I've definitely seen a different attitude in some of the countries to others. So, the culture, etc.
Well, I think that there are also a lot of surprises.
Yeah.
So for me, what stuck out is that there's there's nowhere where gender equality is achieved or yet.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
there's nowhere that's perfect, and
Yeah.
there's nowhere where this work is done.
Yeah.
So obviously, you have countries where women, don't even have basic rights. Let's say that, or women have limited rights, or things like that. But it doesn't mean that because, here we do, and, here we don't have to fight for an abortion, or, fight for voting, or fight for things like that. It doesn't mean that the fight is over, right? Like, the fight is over when things are achieved. The fight's over when we don't have any more pay gap. And for me, as long as the pay gap is like 20 something percent, as long as there's discrimination, it's still not a fair world to live in. It's still not a world I want to live in. So, I'm going to keep fighting for that, because I don't think it's fair. And I think that if you, think about those two fights, basically covers every single country in the planet.
Yes.
Because, nowhere have we stopped fighting those fights.
Yeah.
So I think there are slight differences, but as more I talk to people around the world, the more the same things come up, and I'm organizing right now a conference in Russia, and it's like this, okay, what are the issues that women entrepreneurs are dealing with? Like lack of funding, no credibility, just not having enough women role models,
Yeah.
all this, and you're just like, well, what are the struggles that we are having? I'm like, identical.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry to say that.
Yeah. No, it was just interesting to know if you had seen a difference, because some people categorize certain regions of the world as being fair and open and others difficult, and that there's more of a problem. But with the reality, I've found some of the places I've lived in are really unexpected, and they're the reverse of what, I mean, this is generalizing, obviously, but they're the reverse of what you would expect. And you find the more supportive open-mindedness in all different places where you wouldn't normally think that you would find them. So, and the same with sectors, some of the different industries, some of the industries that are classified as typically male, sometimes you find that in fact they're far more welcoming than you would ever expect, to women, to young people, to something different. So it's difficult to know if there's a focus you can put anywhere in particular, or whether you need to do it everywhere. So from what you're saying, basically it's everywhere.
Yeah, and I think once you get into the details and individual stories, you realize that it's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the differences come when you try to draw, broad generalizations.
Yes.
And then you see that in the reality of things, that's not the case. I mean, people think, especially, I work with a lot of non-European, non-Western institution entities, people, and they always think that things are fairer and more perfect here.
Yeah.
And in some ways they are, because we have certain laws.
Yes.
And they don't even have those laws. So of course laws are a good place to start with, obviously, if you want to create equality. But then, I tell them it doesn't mean that just because those laws are there, right, that you don't have unconscious biases that lead to discrimination, that lead to men and women not being treated equally, that lead to pay gaps, that lead to lack of promotions, that lead to lack of women in leadership position, that lead to women getting out of the job force, that women still just don't have enough sort of childcare to work properly. It's like all these things that still exist as problems, even though the law says that we should be equal. We're not. Otherwise, why would there be in the US and in all sort of European countries pay gaps that are around 20%? It means that we're not. Why is it that women's incomes basically diverge astronomically after the first kid, and even more astronomically after they have a second child? That means the system is not fair, because those are statistics. So those show what's happening across our society. And I think those show that we still have a lot of areas to work on. And a lot of that work today is invisible. Because unfortunately, because the laws are there to protect us, the laws are there to ensure equality, but unfortunately they are not enough, or they have not been enough to do so properly.
So thank you very much. So do you have any final piece of wisdom or key strategy that we should keep in mind that's going to help us going forward? Put you on the spot here.
Well, I think what I like to say is if first of all, like everything starts with yourself and your most important asset. Your business's most important asset.
Yeah.
So think about preserving yourself before anything else, before your business, before other people, before anything, because that's really what's going to ensure your success in the long run. And I just want to share like another thing for people who are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs or leaning in that direction. And that's that you really, if you want to start something, start it today. Start with the smallest idea that you can implement today and make your project become a reality. Because I think there's nothing better than time to kill good ideas.
Yeah.
And the more you think about it, the more it dies in your head. So just really think about the simplest strategy, the simplest thing you could do, the simplest action that you could do today with what you already have, with everything that is at your disposal to start going in the direction of building whatever you want to build. Because I think too many of us have just stopped and paralyzed by fear. Yeah. And think, what is that smallest action that I can take, and just take that one action and get into action.
Brilliant. Those are the two best pieces of advice I've heard that I totally agree with in every way. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiara. It's been a real pleasure, and we have to do it again sooner. Yes, 3 years is definitely too long between interviews. It's been lovely hearing everything. So a big thank you to Chiara Condi for all of her information, all of her support. You'll find on the webpage her social media, the links to her podcast and any other information. And really, listeners, do listen to the podcast. It's fascinating. So thank you, Chiara. Thank you to the listeners. This has been Women Up Radio. Don't forget, join us again next week and have a lovely day. Thank you. Bye.